challenge that we see here, and this is a somewhat ironic challenge, is the overcommitment and coming up against sprint durations. So we've seen some Agile projects where people really ritualized some of the rules of Agile, especially the rules pertaining to hard and fast sprint time deadlines. Now, the irony is that in doing this, they have violated other rules of Agile methodologies, particularly the ones related to a sustainable workload for people on a project. So an example of this, we've seen situations where a project will follow a 4-week sprint, and they will continually overcommit. So in the upfront meetings where there are decisions made about the number of what are sometimes called user stories that are going to be done, then too many are taken on, and the team gets squeezed during the last weekend of each of the sprints. And when I say a test team gets squeezed, what I mean by that is that they are forced to come in over the weekend and try to finish up on time. That's not very sustainable if every 4 weeks you're going to have a big panic on your hands. And so this is what I mean by being somewhat ironic in that you're sticking to one rule and violating the others. Now, to resolve this challenge, we're talking about overall change management maturity and just management maturity really in general. You can't put 10 pounds in a 5-pound bucket. And this goes all the way back to Fred Brooks and the Mythical Man Month. He made exactly that comment. And so this is a well-known software engineering faux pas, if you will, of overcommitting, something, as I said, that Brooks's book, comments on. He's observing it 45 years ago when he was doing operating system projects at IBM. Now, there are methodologies for dealing with this, techniques for dealing with this. There's various types of analysis that many of the Agile advocates promote for tracking what they sometimes refer to as the velocity of your team. And a situation where an organization is willing to be honest about its velocity, it's the number of user stories it can get through in a sprint without creating crunches or unsustainable workloads, and this problem can be resolved. Now, if you're on a test team and there is no such maturity to understand that technique, apply that technique, and then abide by the constraints under which you collectively as a team find yourself, then risk-based testing really becomes ever more important, because you are going to be able to use risk-based testing to reduce the scope of the testing based on your risk analysis, rather than getting pushed into this panicked, working 48 hours over the weekend type of thing to try to get everything done. And this may get to the point where you even have to slip your low-risk test into a subsequent sprint. Now, that's not likely to be very popular, but you're at least engaging in a level of agilism, if you will, even if the team as a whole is not really willing to follow the rules. Now, another challenge that we have seen is what I'm referring to here is the blind spots in the sprint silos. There's organizational issues. So a number of our RBCS clients that have adopted Agile methodologies have also retained an independent test team, and I think that's a very good idea. What typically happens is that there's some sort of partitioning or matrixing of the test team across the different sprints, and that has the effect of creating a dotted line report to the sprint leader. Now, this has some advantages, it can have some advantages, but it can also create disadvantages if it's not managed carefully. So we'll take a look at those. The sprint silo advantages, at least the advantages to the sprint and to the sprint leader, is that the tester or testers who are allocated to the sprint are, of course, going to focus entirely on sprint-related tasks, and the tester will allocate and reallocate their time based on the potentially changing sprint goals, and typically working at the direction of the tester, and in some cases without consulting the test manager. And so this is where the problems start to creep in. This is where the siloing starts to happen, is that the tester becomes less and less of an independent tester and more of an appendage of the project team, if you will. And these kind of situations are the ones where we see sprint leaders having testers work overtime to try to hit sprint deadlines, particularly in cases where we've seen organizations that are actually paying incentives, bonuses, rewards of some kind or another to the sprint team for finishing a certain number of user stories within a given sprint. Now, those of you who are Agile purists on the other end of the phone, I can almost hear you screaming, "That's not Agile! That's not Agile!" And you're right, it's not. But it nonetheless, this is, as I remarked at the outset of this webinar, this is something that we do see happening amongst some of our clients who've adopted Agile, even clients who have been trained by people who are noted luminaries in the Agile world. So there's something about the process that doesn't always stick, particularly when it comes to this working as a team together to meet reasonable deadlines in a sustainable way. Now, the sprint leader is going to see another advantage here, which is that the test effort in the sprint is not going to vary. The number of testers will be determined at the outset of the set of sprints typically, and the sprint leader doesn't have to worry about their tester getting quote unquote pulled away on other things. But this again, is the tester is now becoming part of the project team, less and less connected in that way to the test team. So the advantages are almost a zero-sum game sort of advantages, because they bring with them a number of sprint silo disadvantages. Now, when I say these are disadvantages, I'm not saying that these necessarily will happen, and it would happen on all projects, but they can happen, and they do happen. We have observed them happening on various project teams. So one of them is the potential loss of independence. Tester is not feeling empowered to make an independent assessment of quality, or to communicate that assessment to the appropriate people, or they feel like when they do communicate their assessment, it is not effectively passed on. Tester, being in a silo, doesn't necessarily have a full system-level perspective from broader contact across the organization and across the product, so then that tends to reduce the tester's defect detection effectiveness, particularly for interoperability and end-to-end issues. The testers start to make mistakes in these situations related to gaps and overlap, because there is not a way of coordinating the activities across the test teams. In this case, the test teams being as a team, and often a team of one in each one of the silos. Now, the test manager, of course, has now, to some extent, lost the ability to manage the overall workload of their resources, the people working for her or him, and that can then mean that if there is a problem that I just have discussed earlier, the rampant overtime problem, then that of course is going to lead to increased turnover. And in the long run, the fact that the test manager can't direct people to do things that are independent of a sprint can lead to a reduced ability